more folks happy to jump in. So, okay, if everybody's here, or as you're coming on in, I think I know most of you. I'm just looking real quick here. Yes, that looks really good. Most of you know I'm Tony, and I am here today joined with one of my friends from a long time ago, actually. We used to go to youth group together back in the day, Chicago youth group together, and we've connected over the years. And then when I moved here, he's like, hey, I live like not far from you. So it's been cool. We've been able to reconnect, and he was willing to counsel my family on a couple of questions. And then I thought it'd be fun to do something like this. So just to kind of get things started, I think I've shared this off and on over the years with you guys, but having not really grown up in a Christian home, a lot of things in life I had to figure out as I went through them. And there's a lot of things that you can figure out on the fly. There's other things that you really do need to think ahead on. And the problem with that is you don't always know what those things are. So some of those habits that I got into early on, I kind of inherited from my parents that involved spending money that we didn't have, which created debt. It involves signing up for goofy subscriptions to things that I didn't really need. There used to be this thing called the Columbia Music Club. I don't know if you guys have ever heard of this. For like a penny, you could join this club. You'd like tape a penny to a postcard, which I still don't know how that works. But and then they would send you music. But the problem was you'd have to eventually buy, like, music was super expensive. So I got into debt with that. I got into debt with other things. And then when I got married, my wife and I were just kind of like, okay, like, what are some of these things we should just not do anymore? What are some good habits to get into? And so then you start inheriting new teaching. And some of the new teaching I got around was the idea of a 10-10-80 life. 10-10-80 meaning the first 10% of money that you get, you just give right back to God. It's called the tithe in church circles. The second 10 would be your savings. And then the 80% was the idea of try to live off of 80% of your income. But what I didn't really know, even at that point, was there are creative ways to handle your savings. And savings, a lot of times you just think put money in the bank. There are different ways to handle it. And so over the years, as I've fumbled forward on some of this stuff and fumbled back a little bit, I learned a lot about how the economy works. Not to the level that Jay knows, but I've certainly realized I need people like him in my life to help me with things and see things that I don't see. So what we'd like to do here in this time, and it can be a short conversation, it could be a long conversation, but we just wanted to create space for you guys and others who will be watching to be able to ask questions. We have some new questions probably just because of all that's going on in our culture with coronavirus. You're hearing words like recession, you might even be hearing words like depression. And so sometimes it's helpful when you hear things in the news to understand the difference between speculation and reality. It's also good to be able to know, what do you do if you have money in the bank right now, or what do you do if you don't? And so I'd love for you guys to just feel free to share questions. You're welcome to ask them. I'll also be looking in the chat. So if you guys see the chat feature on the Zoom call, you can certainly type things there, and we'll try to get to those as well. But let me introduce Jay. So Jay, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so as Tony mentioned, he and I grew up together in the Chicago area, and we actually served as interns at the church that we grew up at. And so that's how I got to know him. And I started out my professional career also in ministry. So I was a pastor for close to 17 years, I think, in various churches throughout the country. And then ultimately I ended up moving into the world of finance, really with the recognition that I had 3 kids that were approaching college. And I admire Tony for sticking with it with ministry, because those guys don't usually make quite enough to pay for things like 12 years of college coming up. And, but that was a goal of mine, and it was still a way for me to be in people's lives, helping them progress towards their goals, but it was with a little different focus. And how do I help them manage their money in a God-honoring way, and and help them achieve those goals and live lives of meaning and purpose because they're equipped to do it financially. And so that's kind of how I got started. And so I've been in the industry, in the finance industry for since 2012 now. And, I'm a partner in my firm and doing well, and it's been a wonderful experience. So that's a little bit about me. And I'll start with a little bit of framework to hopefully help you guys maybe frame some of the questions that you might have as well. Okay. Because usually hard to get conversation rolling with questions without some kind of framework. So, one of the things that I would really mention to you anytime you're thinking about using your money in a God-honoring way, first of all, money in and of itself is not a worthwhile thing to orient your life around. Money is simply a tool that we use to honor God and to, bless and take care of other people and provide. It's okay to enjoy your money. There's nothing wrong with enjoying your money. But it should not be the primary goal. Where we get into trouble is when money starts to become our God and something that we're using as the guide point of our life, as opposed to something that equips us to live life in a God-honoring way. But one of the things that you should always think about with any dollar you're thinking about is, what is the purpose of this money before you try and do anything with it? A lot of times people will come to me and their first thought is, hey, I just want to make more money. And that's not the starting point. The starting point should always be, this money is for a goal that I have in 3 years or 5 years or 10 years or 20 years. Whether it's down the road, I want to buy my first car. How can I get there and do that well and maybe earn a little bit more than the bank can give me along the way? Or how do I have a down payment for a first house or pay for college education? Should always be thinking about the purpose that money serves before you get into investing in any kind of vehicle. Because if it's a long-term goal, you have an opportunity to make more money than very safe savings can give you. But the shorter that goal is, the more conservative you need to be. And maybe a bank account is the best place for you. Because you don't want to take risk with money that is for a goal that's in 6 months. That's something you're just saving for in a savings account.
So Jay, when I got my first paycheck, I was excited to have money in my hand. I went to the comic book store and I bought comic books. I bought a watermelon and I bought purple Peeps, Easter Peeps. And I felt like a millionaire. And then I dribbled watermelon juice and sugary Peeps all over the comic books, and so my investment failed. So you're saying there are better ways to spend money?
Absolutely. Okay. So I'm going to give you some framework of kind of the whole continuum of money. I'll kind of start there and help you think about different ways that you can save money. Okay. So, and this is a talk that Tony and Daniel and I actually had, where I kind of helped think through some of these things. So there's always 3 things you can do with your money. What's the first one? Anyone shout out, what's the first thing you can do with your money?
Invest
it.
I heard invest. What else did I hear?
Spend it.
Spend it. That's the one I always hear, right? So the first thing people think of is, well, I could go out and spend it, right? And that's a terrible answer. You're stricken from giving any answers the rest of the night. Just kidding. Obviously, you can spend it, and ultimately, that's what your money is for. But when you save it, really, there's an investment that's happening. So the first place most people turn to for saving money is in a checking account or a savings account or a money market account. So there's some challenges with that, because if I'm trying to make my money grow, and particularly if my goal is a long-term goal, money markets right now, does anybody know what the interest rates that the banks are giving you right now?
I think like somewhere around 12% is the typical APR I've looked at.
Okay, so that's a loan rate. That's what a credit card is going to charge you for borrowing money. But right now, the banks, in fact, if I'm going to help make some sense, when you hear the Fed lowered the interest rate, the Fed just lowered the interest rate to 0%. And so that means that the banks are giving us about 0.01. So for every $100 we save in the bank right now, every year they're going to give us a penny. Okay. Now, if you make a penny on $100, are you excited about that? Probably not, right? So at the same time, the cost of everything we purchase continues to go up every year. And in fact, that's inflation, and that averages about 3% per year. Okay. So if you have your money in a bank account right now, it is definitely not keeping pace with the price of the products, goods, and services that you pay for. So if you have a long-term goal, it's just not a great place to help you keep pace with inflation and have more money tomorrow. Does that make sense? All right, I'm getting some nods. Second place that people can go to is you can make loans, right? And actually, when you put your money in a bank, you are actually loaning your money to them, and they can loan it out and charge interest. Okay, and so that interest that they charge, they get to keep that. That's how banks make money. But then they hand a portion back to you if you keep some on deposit, but not very much. But when you make a loan a little further out, you might do it a few different ways. You might purchase a certificate of deposit, like a CD. Right now, CDs are maybe getting you about 1% interest for a 1-year CD. If I go a little further out and I buy a bond would be a loan to either a government, a city, a company, and they might pay me a little bit more interest, but I might be tying my money up for as long as 30 years. And so when I buy a bond, I buy that bond, I will get the principal back almost in every case. It's very rare that a high quality bond goes bad. There is some risk there. But it's very low. If you stick with an investment grade bond, they default about 0.03% of the time. So 99.97% of the time, you get your principal back and you collect interest along the way.
So I got a question for you.
Yeah.
So if all of these areas, like you mentioned, savings and bonds and all these things are very low interest, why do they tend to be the ones that we think of the most or go to the most with regard to how we deal with our money?
Yeah, so it depends on what your background is, of course. I remember when I was first introduced to anything, the first thing was go to a savings account, and that's what my parents were able to teach me about. I think one of the reasons that happens, Tony, is they say there's 2 appointments that people hate having more than anything. And the number one is explainable. It's the dentist. Nobody wants to go to the dentist. It's an intimidating appointment. The second one that comes up on tests every year, surveys, is meeting with a financial advisor. It's an intimidating place, and where people have not spoken the language before, and maybe if they have had a conversation, that person spoke over their head, they were condescending or arrogant, and it turned them off to it, And so a lot of times people just stick with what's comfortable and what they understand, I think. All right. Any other questions there?
Yeah, guys, feel free to chime in if you have something you want to ask about. Totally available, or you can use the chat.
Do you want to read those to me, Tony, as you see them?
One of them is, what is considered the most aggressive way to invest? This is from Leanne.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's this whole continuum. I was going to continue moving along that. There are some ways that I do not even recommend and do not invest in. Penny stocks are very, very aggressive because a lot of those companies will not be around tomorrow. And so you could literally lose everything that you put into them. Options trading can be pretty aggressive because if you don't know what you're doing, you can really put yourself in a lot of harm's way. If someone bought something like, or if they shorted a stock, literally the risk is unlimited in potential. Okay. So options and derivatives trading are very, very aggressive. Commodities trading is very aggressive. So that would be some of the more aggressive things out there. So.
We have another one. Julie asked, as a high schooler, what is the best way to be preparing ourselves financially for our future?
Yeah, so I tell you, the first thing is engaging in the conversation, right? Getting some financial literacy. So some of the best advice I could give you is find out who you can talk to about this, who will give you the time of day, who will educate, who has the heart of a teacher, and will give you time. Okay, that's very, very just being able to have the conversation and continue to learn is going to be the first thing. Now, what is the best way to preparing yourselves? I would also encourage you to read a book by Rachel Cruz. Rachel Cruz is the daughter of Dave Ramsey. And you guys use Dave Ramsey, Tony?
Yeah, actually, and Justin and Rachel are in the chat here. They have a heart for Dave Ramsey's ministry as well.
Yes.
So the thought was, if after this conversation, somebody wanted to keep going and learn a little bit more, they in the past have offered to continue to be friends within our church that way too.
Excellent. So Dave Ramsey has excellent material. And I will tell you that I agree with about 98% of what Dave Ramsey says. I am not a 100% Dave Ramsey person, but I do. He has done an awful lot of good for a lot of people. Now his daughter Rachel Cruz, in the books that she's written, she's taken on a different approach. Dave has taken on the approach of really helping people who have already gotten themselves into trouble and have to work their way out of debt and get to a better place. He teaches them a better way to manage their money. What Rachel has done is Rachel has really taken on the preventative, almost equated to preventative medicine. How do you live your life in a way so you don't get in trouble in the first place?
Yeah.
And I would really recommend for students, I would really recommend Rachel Cruz. There's some very interesting things, like you never have to buy.
Oh, sorry about that. Keep going.
You never have to buy a new car. Dave talks a lot about don't waste your money on a new car. The depreciation is tremendous when you drive a new car off the lot. If we buy a used car 2 to 3 years old, we can usually save up and pay for that. And by the way, you can probably turn around a year later and sell that car for about the exact same price you paid for it. And then you've given yourself another year to save up and upgrade your car the next year. So being just wise and not letting that itch of having the newest, best, latest, greatest be your driving factor will really help you avoid some of those ditches.
So can you say that again? You said buy a car and then do something in a year and then upgrade. So one more time.
Yeah. So my wife and I this last year, her car started to give us some problems, and we decided it was time to upgrade. Okay. So what we did, and now, and my income is, I could go out and get a very nice car, but we're very, very frugal, my wife and I. And so what we did is we went out and we bought a $4,000 Kia small little SUV that was a Kia with 123,000 miles on it. But the body and everything was in good condition, so we paid $4,000 for it. Was able to just write a check for that car. It's no problem. If I wanted to turn around and sell that car a year later, I can probably sell it myself for $4,000, right? But in the meantime, I've given myself a year to save up more money, even if I'm saving $200, $300 a month. You know, so the next year comes, now I've got $7,000 plus to put into another car, and I can upgrade my car. And that way I never take on any debt with a car. I just keep stepping up into a nicer vehicle each year if I do it that way.
That makes sense. And I think early on, I might have cut you off too. You were going through this arc of, savings and then so keep going with that a little bit too.
Yeah. So just I was on bonds, and bonds, we maybe get to about 3% for a long-term bond right now. Again, interest rates are quite low, but those are safer investments. Okay. You don't take a lot of risk with bonds. And so, as we get closer to retirement or towards whatever goal we're working toward, having a little bit more of that money in bonds is a little bit more appropriate for us, because it, is not going to go down significantly right before your goal comes due. Okay. Now, after those kinds of loans, the next thing you can do is you can become an owner of a company or a series of companies or a group of companies. Okay. And that's when we are buying stock in the stock market. Okay. Now, people forget, when you own stock, you actually become an owner of a company. So if I buy stock in McDonald's, I am actually an owner in the company of McDonald's. And I get to participate in the profits or the losses of every McDonald's around the globe. Okay. Now, in a very small percentage, but I know that for every cheeseburger, French fry, or Coca-Cola that McDonald's sells, that is going to help add to my profit from that company. Okay. So when you think about the first step into stocks, you usually think about the things that we need every day. Okay. So, when I ran through this, Tony, I said, with Tony and Daniel, I said, let's talk about what happens if I lose my job tomorrow, right? What are the things that I'm still going to do no matter what? And I said, the first thing, we all go to the same first door first thing in the morning. It's a little embarrassing, but we all go to the bathroom first thing in the morning. We all have to go and turn on utilities and lights and water, right? We get ourselves ready for our day. And so companies in the utility sector tend to be one of the safer kinds of companies you can own, because we're going to use lights and water no matter what. We're in a bit of a financial downturn right now with the coronavirus, yet every single one of us has lights on and we're using water every day. And in fact, we're probably paying a little bit more for that stuff right now than we do on a normal basis, because we're at home all the time.
Just our sanitation department said that they're doing at least one more run than they normally plan, if not two, every week, because of all the people at home.
Yep. So there's the utilities. After I get ready for my morning, the next thing I do is I go downstairs and I probably pour myself a bowl of cereal, right? Or make myself a cup of coffee. And those are consumer staples. So those are these great companies that have been around for a long time. And boy, all of those consumer staple products, we just saw them just a few weeks ago. They couldn't keep the product on the shelves as this whole thing started because everyone ran to the store because they were afraid they were going to run out. And that's the stuff we need, you know. So you think about General Mills and Kellogg's and Procter and Gamble that makes toilet paper, Colgate that makes toothpaste. You know, these are great consumer staple companies that have been around for a long time, right? So after I get ready, have something to eat, then if I don't have a job, what should I be doing? I should be going out to look for a job, right? So let's say I actually get an interview and it's February in Minnesota. How am I going to get there? I'm probably going to get in my car and drive there, and I'm probably going to put some gasoline in the tank. I'm not going to be riding my bike to an interview in February, right? So, you know, your energy stocks, if they're the larger energy stocks, they tend to be something that we always need and use. Now, kind of a weird anomaly right now because none of us are using oil. So if you are using gasoline right now, and so if you've seen what's happened, if you've watched anything on the news, oil and gas stocks went in the tank. One, because there is so much production of oil right now, but there is also so little demand. And that's created this environment where it has really been harmful to those companies, okay? But usually they tend to be safer. And that goes to show you some of the risks that you can have, that some of this stuff, I would have said that's a much safer place to be in the market. But there is always risk because we can't predict things like coronavirus. And so it impacts the market.
So as those things go down, I imagine there are new stocks that you don't want to be in for the long haul, but maybe in the short term are worth looking at, and you make those adaptations as you go.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Now, I'm not going to name any companies here, but I'll tell you one thing that I have been looking at personally is there are these companies that they specialize in storing oil, right? So right now we've got a problem because we've got all this oil that's being drilled and there's nowhere to keep it. All of the places that we normally store oil on land are filled up. And so there is this opportunity, some companies that have very large crude container ships where they store oil so that it can be sold at a later date. Well, those have not done very well in recent years, but there may be some opportunity there now as the demand for storage goes up. So, yep. So, yeah, so after we talk about oil, you know, if I'm out of work still and I'm still trying to find that job, I'm going to go and let's say I get an interview and there's one piece of information that is the most important piece of information on my resume or application. And I'm going to ask a question here because I love this question because it stumps everyone. Daniel, you can't say the answer. You're eliminated. But if you are going to put one piece of information on your application, what is the most important piece of information that you would put on there? Anyone? I could be patient all day.
The potential you have to grow.
Okay, that's a great thing to put on there. It's not the most important though. Great answer.
Your experience.
Experience is very good. Anyone else? the most important piece of information you need to put on an application is your phone number.
Oh,
Because if an employer can't reach you, they will not do the homework of tracking you down. So we all pretty much have to have a phone number. And so, again, similar to utilities, even in a market downturn, we're probably going to keep our cell phone working so that we can get hired again, right? And so companies like Verizon or AT&T or other communications companies are pretty darn important. After that, after we turn in our application, if they call and they offer us a position and we get hired, they're going to ask us for a piece of information because they all want to pay us a certain way. And so every employer, nobody likes cutting checks anymore. They want to do direct deposit to your checking account. And so we all pretty much have to have some kind of bank that we're working with, okay? And so that's another stock and that is in this needs category, okay? And then the other thing is if we take medications, you know, some of our pharmaceutical companies would fall in this category as well because they make drugs that keep us alive. If someone's a diabetic or if they have blood pressure problems, they're always going to take their medication. They're going to make sure that they can maintain that. So all of those tend to, and there are exceptions, but most companies would fall in that category. They would be typically on the safer side of the stock market, okay? And the reason why I say that is twofold. One, because we need them, and so we continue to buy them. But the second thing is most of those companies, if I'm an owner of that company, they give us a paycheck. Now, they don't call it a paycheck, they call it the dividend. The dividend is simply a paycheck that you get for being an owner. And so many of those companies that would fall in that category that I mentioned, they give us a paycheck ranging from about 2% to 5% of what we own annually. And so if I'm in those things, I have this income stream that's helping me, okay? And that also gives me a little bit of protection because if the stock goes down in value, I'm still getting something out of it. And most of the time, most people reinvest that paycheck. And so if the stock goes down in value, they can turn around and buy more shares of that same thing, even when it goes down in value.
So let me just add to this. I think you mentioned the phrase income stream. This is something else that I kind of learned the hard way, is we need to have multiple income streams in our life. And a lot of people who are out of work right now, it's a very obvious tell of if there are other things that can bring them money. So something that I've just tried to personally boil it down to is just 4 different types of income streams. There's your main thing that you do. That's your full-time job. There's your thing that you could do if you need to make some money on the side, you know, your little side hustle, something you're good at, something you sell, something maybe you do during certain times of the month where you're able to, you know, have a weekend of availability and you can go work for somebody else. There's the quarterly or the biannual things that you can do. And then there's your annual stuff. And it feels like what you're talking about here with stocks. Stocks are that annual yield where you just want to see where your stocks are at. You can check in on them throughout the year, but have that thing that you can draw from if you need to, but also invest it into your future. Is that kind of?
Yeah, now most stocks, and every stock that does pay a dividend, it is not consistent. It is not an income stream you can particularly rely on because it's determined by the board of directors of a company. And they can cut that dividend without any notice to you, okay? But most companies that do give us a paycheck or pay us a dividend, most of them pay that quarterly, but they quote it to us in an annual amount. So it's an annual amount and they pay it 4 times a year. Okay. So as we get more aggressive in the stock market, we look at things that and really I would say it's the wants that we have, not the needs, right? So if I lost my job and I told my wife I needed to run out and buy a brand new Apple computer at that time, she's going to tell me, no, you don't. You can go to the library and use theirs. And, so I don't need to spend that kind of money for something like that. So some of those technology stocks tend to be, they tend to be a little more discretionary. Now, it's a valid argument to say maybe they're becoming more integrated into our life now. And we certainly see how dependent we are on them during this whole epidemic. Second thing is what we call the consumer discretionary category. There you would have things like electronics, like big screen TVs. You would have automobiles there. You would have appliances there, and then luxury like fashion items. If my wife told me she needed to run out and buy a new Louis Vuitton or Coach handbag, I would tell her, no, you don't. You can get by with a plastic bag if you need to, if I don't have a job, right? And so it's the kind of things that we would put a hold on if we didn't know where our income was coming from. Okay. The last thing that I would say is industrials also fall in this category. Okay. So an industrial is a company that makes a product for another company. And so this is often where people are the least familiar with the companies that they might be investing in. So you think about a company like Boeing. What Boeing does is they make airplanes. You and I probably aren't going to run out and buy an airplane anytime soon. The people who are going to buy them are either our government or FedEx or UPS or the airlines are going to pay for those. And you see when we have these big downturns in the market, just pay attention on the news. It's kind of interesting. If there's a big downturn, you almost always hear about the airlines cutting jobs. You hear about flight attendants and pilots getting laid off. And that always happens when the market takes a downturn because we cut back on things like travel. And so, those companies have a little bit more risk, and they're going to be a little bit more cyclical with the economy. They're going to go down a little bit more when the economy isn't doing well. But when the economy is doing very well, they can make a lot of money and do very well. And so that's kind of the broad strokes of the different sectors in the stock market. Okay. Now, and I'm going to go back and say, what should most young people do is you should look to have high quality investments and diversify them. And so Dave Ramsey talks a lot about mutual funds or ETFs, exchange traded funds. And those are wonderful ways where you can kind of buy broad parts of the market and have them managed so that you aren't taking the risk of any one specific company.
Hang on a second. Most students aren't thinking that way, though. Most students are thinking about college or getting a car. So how does that actually practically work?
So, I'm sorry, what was the last part there, Tony?
Just, no, I mean, like, because I wouldn't disagree with you, but how does that work in terms of, like, because those are the next things in their life. I need a car so that I can go to school, so that I can get a job. Like, how does that actually play out?
Yeah. So that's why I started with what I started with, to say, always make sure you understand the purpose of the money. So anytime you speak with someone who's in the investment world who's going to give you guidance, they need to know who you are. They need to know what's most important to you and what goal you're aiming towards. Okay. So if you're aiming towards a goal of getting your first car and you're thinking, I have, 3 years until I get that car, then you can start saving, and you can save a little bit, but you wouldn't put a whole lot in the stock market, but you can have most of your money in a savings account. You could have a little bit in some bonds and a little bit in the stock market. And that would help you earn a little bit more. But you have to understand the risks that you're taking. And so if we think about, and we're going to do a little bit of math here, right? If I have 50% of my money in the stock market, and the stock market goes down by 25%, the rest of my money is in safer investments, right? It doesn't really go down with the stock market. How much will my overall account go down if 50% of my money goes down 25%?
12.5%.
You got it. Perfect. And so that's what I say. You need to understand the risk that you're taking. If being down 12.5% is too much risk for you, then you shouldn't take it. And you should have less than 50% in the stock market. And that's
good.
That's what an advisor needs to walk you through to make sure you understand that downside risk and how much you can afford that you're willing to put at risk in order to have a little bit better return.
Sure. Yeah. No, and I think that's all good. I'm just thinking of the people here in the chat and maybe where they're each at, just from what I know of them in life. I know just especially they've been with the economy having been sort of changed really in the last 2 months for America and then globally. What is different now? Like what would you say are some of the realities we might be looking at that could alter the standard advice you would give somebody?
What is different now that would alter so what I would say right now, and actually, I still have, it's still the same conversation, because it's still about what is your goal, how far away is your goal, and what does it look like to get there, right? So we still design it with that goal in mind to help you achieve a rate of return to get there in really the safest possible way in the time frame you're trying to get there, okay? But so what's a little bit different is, honestly, I've probably had more people bringing me money recently because they recognize that, the Dow Jones Industrial Average, which is one of the measures of the overall stock market, is down 20% from its all-time high. And maybe you've heard the term that you want to buy low and you want to sell high, right? So there is this idea that it's probably a good time to potentially look at getting some money invested. However, it shouldn't deviate from your overall plan. So if you're not comfortable with the risk, you still wouldn't do that, right? And so you got to answer that question of the goal and the risks that you're comfortable with first before you move into trying to time the market, because I really don't believe in timing the market. I believe in having a plan to get to a goal and designing your investments so that you can get there in the safest possible way.
Yeah, we don't have the picture that you showed me when we met, but there was this arc of how like some stocks just kind of go up and down and up and down, but over time, if it's a good stock, you stay with it. You're not necessarily looking for the fact that you're down this month, but rather what is its potential track record for the long haul. So any of this stuff, it's having that consistent view. Yeah.
Time in the market is your best friend. One of the things that I would often sit down, because people will say to me that, well, the stock market, that's gambling, right? And I will just tell you, there's a very big difference between the stock market and going to a casino, because the longer you sit at the table at a casino, the more likely you are to lose money. The longer you sit at the table of the stock market with high quality investments, diversified in a plan, the more likely you are to make money.
So, okay, this goes back to why I wanted to do this now, because I know that a lot of students just aren't thinking long term. But if you can just paint a picture really quick of if somebody were to start saving in this way at this age, what that looks like over the years, whether they're saying, hey, this is for my retirement, I don't want to touch it for the next 50 years, or this is for college in 5-10 years. I'd love to hear that. And then Justin and Rachel, if you have anything you want to chime in on this or even other topics related to money, I'd love to pick your guys' brain too in a moment. But so Jay, what do you think about that? Why is this important now?
Yeah, the number one thing that I can tell you is you guys having this conversation and engaging and thinking about this now, it is one of the best gifts that Tony can give you, because somebody who starts early with this and keeps it going for the long term, every one of you has the potential to be very wealthy if you learn this, apply it, and start today. You know, doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be a lot of money. It's the consistency of the habit that helps you get there. Typically, I would tell you that money doubles roughly, and it depends on how aggressive you're being with it. But if I put $1,000 in 7 years, roughly, that's going to be about twice as much. If you're a little bit more conservative, it might be every 10 years that it doubles. Kind of depends on how much risk you're willing to take. But so if you think about that, a one-time investment doubles. But if you just keep doing that year after year, month after month, that really accumulates over time, and then money doubles itself again and again and again. You know, every one of you could have millions of dollars by the time you retire if you started this when you get your first job and you save 10, and Dave even says go up to 15% of your income. He tells us save 10 to 15% of our income. If you do that, you will be as wealthy as you want to be, and you will be able to live in the way Dave Ramsey says it. He says, live like no one else today so you can live like no one else tomorrow. And so that you can be generous and you can give and support other goals and needs and help other people out as needed.
Good stuff. Justin, Rachel, what have you learned from being a part of the Dave Ramsey concepts? I don't know too much of how it has affected your story. Like I said, for me, just learning some of those principles early on, from spending money I didn't have to developing a savings plan and an emergency account and all that. Like what are you proponents of based on all that?
Yeah, so I think the biggest thing for us, you know, Rachel and I have been married for 17 years. So I think regardless if you're 15 or 50, I think the biggest thing that we've learned that worked for us is doing a budget. And I think budgets can be scary. Maybe some of us have done a budget before, maybe some of us haven't.
And they're hard to stick to if you do them sometimes.
Yeah, but I think telling your money where to go, I think that's going to be, you know, the biggest thing to help you save money. At least that's what we've learned as we've kind of went through our 20s and our 30s. So getting it on paper, it doesn't need to be fancy like in an Excel spreadsheet, but if you have a yellow pad, just a piece of paper, you know, and you have an income. So just kind of think about, gosh, the next 2 weeks, what do I need to spend my money on? You know, I have to put gas in the car. I go out to eat a little bit every week.
And tithing.
Or I give some money to the church. Yep. So I kind of just put that down on paper and try and think ahead a couple weeks. I think that's the biggest thing, because what we've learned is if we don't write it down, we don't have a plan, we'll spend money and it kind of wanders off and we lose control. So I think we've learned a lot just to plan for your money. I think with a budget too, some of us think like a budget is like a straitjacket. You know, it's kind of like a punishment. But it's really not a punishment. It just gives you permission to spend the money that you have coming in as income. I think that's the biggest thing for me.
Yep.
Yeah.
Love it. So when you say a budget, I know Dave Ramsey talks a bit about like even just putting money in envelopes, the cash, so that you've put some money aside here. You do the tithe, you kind of do that part first, and then you live off of what you have left, and then if you have extra amounts of money, like he talks about paying down debt, even like if you have certain debt in your life, the debt snowball concept. So
Yep.
do you want to talk about that real quick?
Yeah, I mean, just some history, I guess, on our story is that, what was it, 2012? I'm an accountant. I'm also a CPA, and I worked in public accounting for like 10 years. And both of he and I were working, but I got really burnt out from what I was doing. And God was calling me to stay at home and finish. At that time, I was still taking my CPA exams, but he called me to stay at home with my kids and finish up my CPA exams. But then, we had to cut out almost a good chunk of our income, and was kind of concerned about how we were going to live off of just Justin's income versus having mine, because we had already done that for 10 years, living with me working. And so it was just at that time that we took on Dave Ramsey's class for the first time. And with that, I guess to make the story short, is we had some debt. We had some quite a bit of student loans, I would say. And in addition to vehicles, some just common debt. We didn't really have a lot of credit card debt or anything like that, but we did use credit cards at that point. And Dave doesn't encourage. So I guess with Dave Ramsey's class, we were encouraged to cut up credit cards, use the envelope system so we can learn how to budget our money. And that was huge. We did use the envelope system and cash for us to be able to understand how we spent our money and tracked it that way until we could learn to understand it. We don't use envelopes anymore, but I've also got a system in place as to how I budget my money, or how our money, God's money. Anyway, so and then we did tackle a lot of our debt. Even we paid off more debt when I wasn't working than when I was. And so we got out of our debt snowball of like $45,000 with student loans and all that in 2.5 years. I did end up going back to work part-time, a 1.5 years of being at home, but everything I made went towards that student loan debt. And so I guess our biggest passion is, had we known that as a teenager, or understood the inconvenience of debt at that time, we probably would have had a lot better situation earlier on. But we also were in an era, I feel like, that debt was very common, especially going to college, and taking on car payments was, like, if you can make the payment, great. We were still saving, but we were probably spending more than being more planful with our spending. And so by putting the budget together, we saw where we could maybe be a little bit more frugal with our spending for at least a short period of time until the debt got paid off, and then be able to kind of start figuring out where we could save money. Our budget before, not that we didn't do it because I'm an accountant, right? So you'd think I'd understand. But we'd have money left over, and then it would be gone before the next time we get paid, versus being like, oh, we have this much left over, let's do this, this, and this with it, versus just like, oh, yay, we get extra money. And so it's just kind of, the mindset changed for us in 2012, and it's been a lot better since. We still talk a lot about that impact that it had for us at that time. So,
and I think during
Awesome.
that
Yeah,
time
go ahead.
too, when we really started to manage our money, do a budget, try and pay off our debt, I think also we increased our giving to the church a little bit. And I think during that time, we were still able to pay off our debt even more quickly. Even, kind of going back to your comment, Tony, around just, giving 10% to the tithe and giving it back to God. Like, we really learned that God really honors that. So if any of you are really nervous about doing that, I'm like, gosh, that's 10%, I can do something with that. It's just honoring God for, I think, what he's provided us with. And he even,
And trusting.
God was able to bless us, with raises and other income. And I think that's really God honoring the tithe. And that was just really cool, really great experience.
And there's no cap to that either, by the way. When you give 10% to the church, you don't have to stop there. You think about what Jesus did for us and that he gave everything for us. There's not a cap there. And so when you do a good job of planning and you build in margins so that you have emergency savings, you have a plan for where your money is going, and you're helping achieve, get to those goals, then you can be very free to do even more as God calls you. But a lot of times people feel limited and they don't feel like they have the ability to get behind an initiative that the church is putting on, or someone in their life. You might know someone who's going on a missions trip, and if you're in a position where you can say, yeah, you know what, I'm going to help fund that for you, and make sure that you can go. It's a wonderful place to be in that place so that you can get behind those things that are more important to you.
I love that. I know, Janelle, you had a question. Just so everybody knows, we'll probably be here about 10 more minutes, and then we'll close up. But I'd love for your questions. So if you have any to be sharing, that would be great. One thing that I love, too, that I think you just said, both of you, is just really everything belongs to God. It's God's money. And I've even tried to change that language as I speak about it. Like, instead of, hey, here's what I'm doing with my money, here's what I'm doing with the money I have access to. It's a great way to change how you think about even what your goals are. The other thing, and I was just thinking about, like, what's the teenager version of, like, the takeaway from all of this, because we're talking about big stuff. It could be just as simple as when you go to Applebee's, because I know a lot of you love to go out to eat after, like, a Wednesday night. Instead of ordering a $12 burger, ordering fries and water. You can still socialize, but you're saving $10 that you would have spent otherwise. That gets to go to something else, and it gets to go to maybe something more important than whatever that burger was. So good stuff. Janelle, you had a question?
Yeah. I know this is like an odd question to ask, especially for someone at my age, but what is your opinion on combining accounts and finances as a married couple? Do you think that's a good idea to, like, share your money, or do you think it's good to, like, I don't know, just what's your opinion on that whole situation?
Yeah, so this is one of those areas where I might slightly disagree with Dave, because Dave is pretty big that if it's a married couple, that it's your money. It's your combined money. He has some teaching that is pretty strong in that regard. Now, that, and I do think there is importance to having that combined, but I do also, from my experience, sometimes one spouse is a good spender and one is not. And I think there can be wisdom in certain cases to someone who is better with their money having more control of it. Just from sitting on my side of the table, sometimes that makes sense. The other thing that I would say is my dad passed away a few years ago. And my dad was not in a position, he did not really have an inheritance to leave me. But I did get about $3,000 total, which is, that is, I shouldn't dismiss that. That's a significant amount of money. But compared to what I see a lot of times that can go from a parent to a child, it didn't seem like a lot to me. But for me, my wife and I agreed that we would keep that money separate, and that would be my money to celebrate my dad and his life. And so I think there are sometimes circumstances where an emotional circumstance where it makes sense to have that money separate. And then I think if there can be some practical, if someone is particularly bad with money, I might want to keep some of that money separate from that person. What would you have to say, Justin, on that? Because I know Dave is a little bit more.
Yeah, I think for us, I totally agree with what you're saying, Jay. I think for us too, we've had our accounts combined ever since we've been married. I think it's been helpful for us. I think Dave Ramsey talks about the old preacher vows are, when you get married, two people become one, right? And we've adopted that for us. We've shared one checking account. And I think, having a budget in place, really helps that work really well. So we're always on the same page in how we spend our money. Granted, if Rachel wants something that's more expensive, or if I want something more expensive, then we have the conversation and we make sure we can fit it in our budget. And we agree on it, or maybe we don't. And we say, it's a little tight this month. I think let's hold off. I think the main thing is we're in agreement together in how we're spending our money. And that seems to work well for us.
Yeah, Janelle, I think your question's really good, especially if you have a big goal like college debt. When Katie and I got married, we had the ability to buy a bigger house because of our combined income, but we said, let's live off of one income from a house buying perspective, and let's use her income to pay down our student loans. And so all of that went to the same checking account, but we just always mentally knew this much money was going to be going toward student loans, and then the rest of it was going to be going toward household expenses. So that can be the benefit of at least mentally keeping track of the two different incomes. It's a good question.
In fact, I want to say that's a fantastic question, and I encourage you to keep thinking like that, and here's why. Really, the number one thing that married couples fight over is money. And the fact that you're thinking about that at this point is really wise, because it also is going to be something that helps you qualify who might be worth marrying, right? You want to marry someone who is, you have to be able to be open and have a conversation about money with that person and talk about how do we use God's money to honor him? And are we in alignment? So you hear me come at it from the backside, and I work with people, and some of them are believers, some of them are not. So I am constantly in situations where I maybe see some people who aren't guided by the same principles as they make those decisions. So I'm a little bit more, sometimes I want a little less togetherness in certain relationships. But if the relationship is right, and if you are both following that same North Star of Jesus leading your life, then you probably won't have that be an issue.
Yeah, and just on that note, you said something else, Jay, like with your inheritance. There is definitely value to knowing what emotional spending looks like in your life and in the life of somebody else. We all have it. There was actually an article in the 2000 recession that USA Today put up that I've always remembered, but it just said the average person has different levels of what they think they deserve. So like right now, you're going through quarantine. You have a perception of what you think you deserve. And so for you, it might mean, I deserve to go to McDonald's and go to the drive-thru and get a sundae. The person you're dating, or let's say you're married to, might say, well, I deserve to be able to go get a steak. I'm going to go get a steak right now. Or you might say, you know what? I deserve to go out and buy a hunting bow because I can't wait for hunting season. And so like all of these emotional things that play into this can create tension in a relationship. So it's good to know how, when you feel suppressed, what your emotions want to spend money on, and to try to draw that out in each other before you get married is really important. It's a good question. Anybody else have another question you want to kind of fire out there just on this topic, or anything else?
I have a question.
Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on investing as much as you can when you're young versus like buying a house and paying your mortgage down aggressively with that money instead?
Yeah. Well, I would tell you that a house is also an investment because property is an investment and a house is an appreciating asset. Okay. So but there's a lot of people that say, when you buy a house, you better have some emergency funds, and you better be prepared for that, because Dave talks about Murphy, and you hear about Murphy's Law, and how the second, and in fact, before you guys were all on, Tony and I were talking, he said, I had a project on this and it went wrong, and then now I got to repair that, and then I went to do something else, and then that broke, and now I got to repair that. And so there is, when you buy a house, you better make sure you have emergency reserves in place, because something will go wrong when you buy a house. In fact, I hear outside my window right now, I don't know if you guys can hear the knocking, but we have about an acre and a wooded property, and I had a tree that was dead about 5 feet from my house. So I had the lumberjacks out cutting down that tree, which is an expensive, costs, close to $1,000 to get a tree like that taken down. And sure enough, as they started to fell it away from the house, the crown came back and ripped off a bunch of siding on the house that now we're going to have to deal with as well. So, that kind of thing is going to happen. So renting can be a perfectly fine way to go, because you don't have to pay the maintenance on a house. And there is something to be said for that, and saving and making sure you build the emergency savings is really the key there, because then when you are ready to buy a house, you have something to help carry you during those times where Murphy strikes.
So basically, just however you're led, paying down your mortgage or investing into the stocks, either is an investment into your future. Yeah. Okay. Other questions you guys have? Things you're wondering about?
Would you have any arguments to validate a concept of responsible credit, or would you just recommend not going that way no matter what?
So that's where I say that I do differ a little bit with Dave. Okay. But I'm going to be very cautious in saying this. Okay. Because I think about the audience that I'm talking to, and I'm talking to a lot of people who really don't have any history with credit and responsible use of credit. Okay. Typically where, and I do use a credit card. Okay. So that is something that I do differently from Dave, but I pay it off every single month. I never carry a balance. And I make sure that I have plenty of ample reserves in place where I could do that for a long period of time, So, so that is one place where I'm a little bit different than him, because it is hard to function in this world, and Dave will say it's not impossible. You can do manual underwriting to buy a house. You can do a lot of different things. But the problem is that you just have to make sure you can manage it well. You have to be very, very prepared and responsible with it, and understand how much you can. And that's where, if you have a budget, you live to a budget, you have ample emergency reserves, it can be possible to have responsible credit. When you buy a home, that is a credit transaction anyway, usually for the first purchase. And so there is appropriate leverage. And I think sometimes Dave goes a slight bit too far. And you guys can argue with me and kind of give counterpoint, and I hope you do. I think sometimes Dave can almost take it to a step of debt-free being a false god. What do you guys think?
Yeah. No. Let me. I'll try to bridge it, and then Justin and Rachel, if you have a thought too. I think, Micah, to your point, and I'll just speak my own example here. I didn't trust myself with a credit card for a lot of years, because I had poor financial habits that I inherited. So that when I started to have a credit card, I had to know why I needed it and what it was going to be used for. And for me, it's just for business expenses. It's nothing that I want to live off of. It's nothing that I want to have on hand. And so leveraging it that way, if you pick the right credit card and that has the right return and it's not going to penalize you, and like Jay said, you know that you're going to be able to pay it off. Like I'm never going to spend money that I don't know if I'm going to find it somewhere else. I want to know that I've got the money to pay this off, and I'm just using the credit card as a convenience to either earn points towards something else, which is how you begin to use your credit card. But I didn't have anywhere near the muscles financially to do that until I lived without credit cards for a long time. And so my encouragement to you would be, don't get into that. So you're in a career where your career maybe requires you to have business expenses, and you want to keep those expenses separate from your personal expenses. And again, you're using that to build your personal credit. It's almost like you're using the system to build your personal credit, but you just got to make sure you can't get into trouble on not knowing where that money's going to come from to pay for it. So I would say make that your last option among all the many other options you have before you even get there. There's a lot of biblical teaching on avoiding going into debt, and I think it's because people tend to not think wisely about how all of that happens. Justin, Rachel, what's your thought on that?
No, I agree. Yep. I think the last thing I would just add is if you find yourself saying out loud, "Oh, I can't afford it this month. I think I'll put it on the credit card." Just have that be a red flag to you. Because if you really can't afford it, then you should probably really pause in buying it. So yeah, that's the only thing that I would add. I agree wholeheartedly.
Good stuff. Other questions, guys?
This might be kind of on a tangent, but are there any ways you know of or things you can do to like minimize your student loan debt coming out of college?
Well, first thing I would encourage you all to take advantage of PSCO if you can. Our son is he's 16. He's completing his first year of college through Northwestern St. Paul online, and we will probably be able to complete at least 2 years of college before he graduates high school. Okay. So I think that is a fantastic program that is out there. And I know Tony and his family have utilized that. And so I know he can provide you information if that's something that, you want to explore. He can help point you to some resources there. And so that would be the first thing I would say. Personally, I went to junior college so that for 2 years before I went to college, and that prevented me from having a lot of student debt. Now I went to a private institution my last 2 years, and I did take on student loan debt. And even to go back to your point, that when my wife and I were dating and engaged, I had some debt. And part of our conversation was that I would not buy her wedding ring when I was in debt, and that we were willing to wait so that I didn't carry that into our relationship. And so I was very mindful of this at a young age to really manage that, because I knew the stress it could put on a relationship. So, so there's some thoughts. I mean, you don't have to take student loans. You can work your way through college, actually. It is possible. People do it.
Yeah, the other thing too, Mike, I would say is depending upon where you are at in life when you graduate college, if you meet this amazing woman in school and you get married and now the two of you are living life with potentially two incomes, you can pull the Tony Myles, Katie Myles plan where one of you is paying off your student loans that way. If you are single when you graduate and your parents are cool with it, you could always ask for a year to live at home while you pay down your debt. And you begin to build maybe, I know what you going into ministry, maybe some local experience with Riverside. Like you can give yourself permission to defy the social stigma that you have to graduate, get your first apartment, buy your first car. Like you don't have to do all that stuff. It's okay to find an on-ramp to those things. So I I think the fact that you're asking the question now can give you some time to create some space for maybe what that looks like. And then leveraging the summers. That was something Ryan at Crown talked about, was just trying to earn anywhere from $2,000 to $3,000 a summer in a 3-month span toward your debts.
Micah, something that Troy Decker from church spoke to me about, he told me, it was actually really good advice, but he told me that you should live like a college student while you're in college, because and obviously because you don't want to live like one when you're out of college, because he is like, I don't know how old he is, but he's like, I think in his late 40s, and he's still paying off college loans because he decided to have a good college life and get a cool apartment and have a credit card. And that's something that he says, that while you're in college, live like a college student. Do as like little as you can when it comes to spending unnecessary money, because he is like having to deal with that now, and he's like in his late 40s. So that's just
That's good advice. Like, even live according to wherever you're at. Sometimes when you get married, you're going to want to have the house that you have been living in, not realizing your parents had to work to get to that level of house. Like, you have to live according to a young married couple's income. You can't live according to a 20-year married couple's income. So yeah, live where you're at for sure. That's good. All right, last question. Who's got it? Anybody?
Can I just piggyback off of that last thing though? Something came to my mind about like the student loans. Sometimes you get approved for way more than what you need. And that's kind of where the bad extra spending can come in. Like, oh, I got a lot of extra money, so that means I can buy all my groceries with that money. And I think maybe having a job in school or while you're at college is really important to pay for some of those extra expenses. So I just know that the way that they provide loans, I feel like nowadays is they just add a whole bunch onto it and say you're approved for this much. And so I think you just got to be cautious about that if you do get approved for loans. So
yeah, it was the loans were hidden in some of the financial aid that we got. It looked as though it was a grant. It looked like it was a scholarship. We're like, wait, that's a loan. And so you have to like look for where they're putting it in your financial aid packages too. So it's good. Well, let me maybe just make one last question, and I would love to just make this as practical as possible. Right now, everybody who's heard this, what do you think is a good first step, second step for everything we've talked about? So maybe sitting down and doing a budget, sitting down and figuring out what your income is, where it's going. Like, what would each of you say, Jay, and then Justin and Rachel, what would you say is a good first and second step?
It's a good question. What do I think is, I guess I would point back to really having a goals-based approach. So I would sit down and think about your money that you may have, and think about what your next significant financial goal is. That's going to inform you what next step you can take with your money. And then of course doing that in conjunction with having a budget for what you want to spend, because ultimately the money that you have right now, and thinking about telling, as Justin said, telling it where you want it to go, as opposed to, not having a plan. Have a plan for the money that you need for your regular expenses, and then think about what your next financial goal is, and get it written down on paper. When we write our goals down on paper, we are much more likely to achieve them.
Yeah, I think I would totally echo that. I would just say, if you've never done a budget before, it's not scary. I'd say give it a shot. If you can, go back, and also you can look back at your previous spending as well. And I think that may shock you. Like, oh my gosh, I spent $150 at McDonald's last month. So hopefully not McDonald's and something else, but if you can go back maybe the last 2 weeks, a lot of times if you have a checking account, your bank probably has built-in functionality where they can do that easily for you if you log into your account. But in addition to doing that budget, if you can look back a couple weeks to see where you're spending your money, that'll be a great place to help you figure out kind of where your money's going and then influence how you may want to change kind of your behaviors to hit some of your goals like Jay talked about.
Yeah, a question that I ask couples when I'm doing premarital counseling is, from memory, tell me the last 5 things you spent money on. And it is amazing how many people can't answer that question.
Yeah.
So to even just be able to know where you're spending your money and what the dollar amount is in relationship to your income is such an underdeveloped skill, and it can get you even just willing to ask bigger questions. My answer to the question I asked is probably what you expect me to say. And it's honestly, I think you just need to spend some time with God and say, God, help me to see this as your money that you've entrusted me with. And why have you given it to me? What is its purpose in my life? For me, for others, for my future. And then to just lean into that and to do your part, to do these steps, I think are really important. Listing your expenses, trying to make sure if you do have extra at the end of the month, you're not just spending it on something random, but something intentional. And it's okay to spend money on things that help you to advance yourself, lessons on things, making sure you have clothing that actually fits you. Like, these are okay things to spend money on. But I also think thinking into the big picture, it allows you to realize how often you should spend money on those things, and puts you in a good position. There's a lot of free stuff right now. I mean, people are offering free lessons and free subscriptions to things, so take advantage of it. All right, hey, we'll call it tonight, guys. If you guys have more questions on this topic and you want to get connected with Jay or with Justin or Rachel, you can just connect with me, and I'll make sure you're able to do that. But truly appreciate everybody tuning in and for all your questions, and even just for listening. And even if you learned one thing, try to pay attention to that one thing. If you learn more, all the better. So have a good rest of your night, guys. And feel free to hang out on the call. I'll stop recording here. And if you just want to ask some personal questions, you can. But really grateful, and thanks for your time.